Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Talking Success. As you've seen in the past, we've focused quite heavily on the world of financial crime, or should I say, combating financial crime. Just a few weeks, or a couple of months ago now, we ran an event in Cape Town, South Africa, called Decoding Financial Crime. And we wanted to do things a little bit differently. We wanted to get into the mindset of criminals because in order to catch a criminal, you need to think like one. And lo and behold, we came across a gentleman who perhaps needs no introduction over in the United States of America, but certainly in this part of the world. Kenneth, who joins us today and was a fabulous, fabulous speaker at Decoding Financial Crime, joins us to talk about kind of his career. I'll give you a snapshot. Kenneth has kindly put on a very intensive 3-part webinar that we're going to be sharing with you over the next sort of coming days and weeks, where he's going to be really delving into the new methods of how criminals are laundering money and money in some big numbers. And when we talk big numbers, I'm not going to do any spoilers here, but Ken, before he sort of moved over to the light side, shall we say, was actually a money launderer himself, and laundered over $200 million from the cartels in the United States. And he's joined us today to talk a little bit about that. Now, clearly, Ken is reformed. He now works with law enforcement, catching people, who are committing these kind of heinous crimes. And I think it's important to note, and Ken, I'll bring you in now. First of all, thank you for joining. But I think it's important to note that, money laundering is not a victimless crime. And I think that's something that I've learned over the last 6-7 months or so, talking to experts like yourself and other people in the field, is that actually there are some real serious consequences for money laundering. We talk about terrorism, we talk about human trafficking, we talk about animal tracking. There's a whole array of drugs. There's a whole array of impacts that happen because of money laundering. This isn't necessarily about someone doing a little deal and then trying to clean a couple of $100. As per your experience, of the hundreds of millions of dollars, this is really significant. Ken, so before we go into your story, would you agree with me on that? This is not a victimless crime.
No, absolutely not, Darren. Unfortunately, it causes prices to go up all around the globe. And most people don't even realize it. But if criminals succeed, the price of real estate goes up, the price of consumer goods goes up. Things that you ordinarily could obtain, you cannot get because people who have more money than who knows what are able to buy it ahead of you, won't have to dicker on the price because they don't have a budget. They're criminals.
Sure. Well, okay. So before we go into the nuts and bolts of this, Ken, give us a quick intro. Obviously, I know your story. It's absolutely mind-blowing. I think, I know that during Decoding Financial Crime, when we did our survey post the event, and what was your favourite topic, and everyone was like, Ken, the laundry man. So I don't need an intro to you, but I think anyone listening might well do. So Ken, please give us the kind of high level, where you started and where you are today. And I appreciate this is not you can't really condense this to a few minutes, but give it a go anyway.
Okay, thank you, Darren. Well, for those of you who don't read any of my work, haven't read my autobiography, my name is Kenneth Rijock. I'm a financial crime consultant. But for 10 years of my life, I was a career money launderer. I started out in life like most people, from a conservative family. My family came to the U.S. 100 years ago from the Ukraine, and we're the American success story. I'm one of 5 people in my extended family who are lawyers, but I am the only one of the 5 who, because of history, ended up serving in a war. And after I came back from serving in the Vietnam War and went to law school, I was placed in a banking law section in an international law firm, which had an office in Miami, London, and in New York. But there came a time in my life when I later realized I was carrying around a lot of baggage. not just because of my military experience, but because I had been exposed to something called Agent Orange, which is a toxic chemical that was sprayed during the war and which unfortunately affected everybody who was exposed to it.
Right.
Years
Okay.
later, I would find out from the Veterans Administration that it causes changes in your brain and changes in your body. But I'm still here, not having gotten cancer. But there came a time in my life when I was stressed out because of a marital situation. And whereas any other normal lawyer would have shied away from any kind of criminal activity, uh, I hooked up with a bunch of Vietnam veterans like myself who were smuggling marijuana, and I gained entree into the world of criminal money laundering. I had already had a lot of background because I was a bank lawyer at an international bank. Uh, although the time doesn't permit that we discuss all the details of what happened in 10 years, uh, and everybody who is a subscriber to the program will be able to read my autobiography at no additional cost to them.
Sure.
Suffice it to say that I came of age in a period in Miami when narcotics were flowing like water, the banks couldn't handle it, and money launderers were reigning supreme.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay. So I think we should focus on this a little bit, though, Ken. I appreciate we don't have, 6, 7 hours, and I could literally talk to you probably for 3 days non-stop because it's just the most fascinating. I think probably you're the most fascinating person I've probably ever had the pleasure of meeting. But let's talk a little bit about that journey. So from Vietnam. Going back into the world of sort of corporate America, um, getting back in touch with fellow veterans, realizing there was obviously this marijuana trade. How did it go from that to this big ticket sort of $200 million worth of money laundering? Because I guess marijuana, I mean, maybe it does have that sort of value, but that's going to be a significant amount of marijuana you need to smuggle for, or you need to bring into the country for $200 million. So what was the interim bit?
That's right, Darren. Nobody wakes up one day and says, I'm going to be a money launderer for a gang that's earning $200 million.
No, I'm
What
sure.
started out as me representing clients who were smuggling pot quickly morphed into me uh, representing clients who were engaged in massive cocaine trafficking, which of
Right.
course was the big cash crop, if you want to call it that, for narcotics traffickers, not only in the past but even in the present day. And I'm kind of like the accidental money launderer because I fell into it uh, by virtue of, by chance, meeting people involved in that trade, uh, coming off a chaotic family relationship, and I was open to new, I guess you might call them new experiences.
Yeah.
And whereas in an earlier or a later time, my moral background would have kicked in this case, uh, I frankly ignored it.
And Ken,
What happened was, I'm
how old?
sorry.
Sorry, Ken. How old were you in this period? So you'd obviously you'd served in Vietnam. You'd come back. What sort of age were you?
I was, a young lawyer, approximately 30 years old,
Right. Okay.
uh, now with no wife and no children, and at loose ends, and living in a city which was flowing obscenely with narcotics, and in a city in which every professional was unfortunately abusing them. Uh, a city in which the economy was largely funded by all of this dope money,
Wow.
which created a boom atmosphere. And fortunately for myself and my clients, my background was that I had been down into the Caribbean tax havens. I knew how they operated. And as such, it was a very easy transition for me to switch from being bank lawyer to being career money launderer.
But you were acting in the capacity for the cartels. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. As their sort of white collar lawyer who would then go and sort of package up the different entities and the legal structures in order to sort of move this money around. Was that your role?
And actually, at that time, the United States had a terrible issue with controlling the offshore tax havens. They
Right.
had no leverage, political, economic, or otherwise, and it was pretty much open season on cleaning dirty money uh, on your own without having any supervision. Remember, these little tiny tax havens are so small that even though they're independent countries, there's no U.S. embassy or consulate there. They
Sure.
may only have 50,000 people in the entire country. So they're in the backwater of the world, obscure, but now inviting money of which nobody really cares about its source of funds and the source of wealth.
And obviously, the world has kind of moved on since then in terms of technology and in terms of global um, focus on things like money laundering and the FATF and what have you. What you were doing in the tradecraft you were applying back in, I guess it was kind of late 70s, early 80s, to what it is now. Obviously it's massively different, right? There's a lot more scrutiny, there's a lot more technology, there's a lot more detection systems. So how has sort of financial crime and specifically money laundering, how has that evolved with the times?
Well, Darren, money laundering was in a rudimentary or very primitive state 40 years ago.
Sure.
Remember, this is before computers.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is when, if you want to contact somebody, you need to get on a plane and go there. So, the more, uh, basically, the crudest and the rudest, but the most effective form of money laundering at that time was what we called bulk cash smuggling. That is me getting on a Learjet with clients and $6 million and flying to a tax haven bank. Now remember, money laundering is composed of three separate and distinct phases. And
Okay.
if you don't catch me in the first phase, you're never going to catch me. Why is that? Well, first of all, placement, which is when you take criminal proceeds and get them into a bank somewhere in the world where they don't ask questions.
Yep.
Back then, it was an easy move. Nowadays, and one of the things we're going to cover in our seminar, are the much more advanced techniques and methods, what we call tradecraft, the methods that use obscure and esoteric industries, the methods that use tricks and techniques that, unless you're actually in that business, you've never even heard of it. So if you're a compliance officer, it goes right over your head.
Mm.
So let's go back to money laundering. The second phase, of course, once you have the money into, let's say, an offshore bank, is a method through which you're moving the money throughout the global banking system so it loses its original criminal taint. We call that layering.
Okay.
Layering is I've already put the money in a Caribbean bank. Let's say now I ship it to a bank in Panama, maybe to one in China, and then maybe to one in London. Now, the third phase, integration, that's the toughest one of all. That's where I invest the cleaned money in the peacetime economy. So let's say I want to buy an office building in Cape Town.
Hmm.
Well, I might set up a bogus bank in London that looks like a bank, but it's really my own captive company. And I might lend the money to myself through a Cape Town lawyer who knows no better. And we have now got the full cycle. Imagine, how can somebody in law enforcement determine that it was cocaine profits from the streets of New York, which made it through the Caribbean, through Asia, to London, and then to South Africa? It's an impossibility. Or it was at that time, because that was pre-computer.
And how has that changed now, Ken? You said that was pre-computer, right? Now we've got all sorts of technologies that are there. I know, people were, a few years ago saying, "Oh, well, cryptocurrency, easiest way to to launder money," but that's now not the case either. Cash is still, as far as I'm aware, and please again correct me if I'm wrong. Cash is still the biggest perpetrator of or conduit of money laundering there is, right? I think there are still big suitcases of money that's literally being travelled around the world. But given the technology, given the advancement, I think this is probably where people's questions would come in. Is yeah, but there's all these systems in place now, and there's global alliances. There's AML screening. There's the sanction side. There's all of these very very complex cryptography. There's always very very complex methods and solutions, and I say that with inverted commas, in place to combat this and to try and capture this. So. During your series that you're going to be putting on, is that something you're going to be covering in terms of, look, this is how we did do it back in the day. The process, the three stage process still applies, but it's now applied in a very different way, and this is how kind of it happens currently. Is that part of what you're going to be sort of talking to the audience about?
Well, you're right, Darren. It's totally different now because we have modern technology. But
Yeah,
that works both ways. While we have excellent software platforms, while we have methods by which one can identify transactions, by which we can uncover criminal activity, the other issue is that on the money laundering side, they are far more advanced than they ever were. And that's the reason for this seminar, because while compliance officers and people involved in AML can rely upon these programs, and they should, at the same time, they need to have a grounding, a well rounded background in what money launderers are doing and will they be doing in 2025. So these esoteric and obscure types of tradecraft, which they may or may not ever see or see only once, has to be known to them so that they can use the software and identify it in real time.
right. Okay. So again, correct if I'm wrong, but what we're talking about here is kind of reverse engineering the software that's there that's trying to detect them, right? So these are very smart people. This is not, I was going to say a skinhead guy walking around with a bag of cash. First of all, yes, I am a skinhead, but no, I don't have a bag of cash. But this is very complex. This is highly skilled, highly trained, and I'll come back to you maybe and ask you how these people sort of develop their careers, given that was your previous life. So this is very sophisticated. These individuals, and I think it's important to mention, this is not necessarily an individual. This is cartels. This is organized crime. These syndicates are working at the cutting edge of technology in order to beat the system. Is that correct? Is that what's happening?
You're right. Now, basically, you're dealing with professionals on both sides of the coin.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
whereas on the banker side, you're dealing with people who are clock punchers, then it's not an adventure to them, it's a career, and they go home at the end of the day. But on the other side, we have accountants, attorneys, financial professionals, ex bankers, people that have years of experience, training, and education, and they are driven because if they make a mistake, it may be their life, and it very well might be. So, therefore, they stay up nights and weekends just to beat the compliance officers. And they're doing a very good job of it because the compliance officers generally don't have what I would call a Renaissance education. They don't know, frankly, sufficient information about geopolitics, about history, about culture, about the day to day operations of many industries, which allow money launderers to then infect those industries with their version of what is a particular item and successfully move it right through the bank in plain view.
Um, Ken, it's interesting you mentioned this. During decoding financial crime, after your session, I think the sort of that afternoon, we broke the delegates into teams, into little groups, and asked them to devise a money laundering strategy. So not an anti-money laundering strategy, but a money laundering strategy, and then present back to the wider group on how they would do this. Now, this was an audience full of professional compliance forensic experts, and we also had some of the regulators there in South Africa, and adjudicating or sort of judging. Although there was no rewards given for the best plan. I think that was probably pushing it a little bit too far. But there was the national prosecutor here, one of the detectives from the equivalent of one of your security forces in the US, and they were sort of there to critique and to poke holes in some of these strategies. And what was interesting is the layering that went on in some of these schemes that these individuals or these groups had conjured up. A lot was around how do we how do we front this? And a lot was using sort of religious institutions. That was a bit of a theme that came out. A church, or whether it be a mosque, or whether it be a synagogue, whatever it may be, actually is quite a good way of getting funds in and then cleaning it through different systems, and then reapplying those funds back into the formal system. But I think what was quite obvious, and bringing up your point as well, is that there wasn't necessarily an appreciation of the wider scope of how these criminals act. And I think having the prosecutor there and having the detective there from the Hawks and going, actually, you haven't thought about this, and we would have caught you doing this. And we had some other vendors there going, actually, our system would have detected you way, way, way before you even thought about doing this. So I think, to be able to open up the minds of experts who are in this field, who perhaps are, as you quite rightly said, working for a bank or working for a financial services, organization, that are sitting effectively behind a computer and looking at data that's coming in, but actually to get into the mindset of these criminals. And that was, I think, Ken, for me, when you started speaking at this event, and just listening and looking around the room, genuinely speaking, people's mouths were kind of, their jaws were on their chests. As you were talking, people were like, wow, I hadn't even thought about this. And I think that for me and for the audience was just such a massive eye-opener. But let's talk a little bit about the seminar. I would like to just focus on that, because this is not just Ken talking about his career as a money launderer and how he got caught. And I know you served time as well, for your crimes, and came out and obviously reformed yourself. But this is about sort of the next step. This is about your life now as an expert in detecting and working with law enforcement. To really combat the criminals that I guess were your kind of partners way back when. So what sort of things are you going to be covering in this seminar that people should really pay attention to?
Well, the first thing is that people attending the seminar need to understand that it's not simply me talking about 21 obscure money laundering tactics. It is me explaining how these tactics were created and how you see them when you're working at your desk in a bank as a compliance officer. You need to see it through the eyes of the money launderer, because once you understand what his goals are, what his objectives are, and what he's prepared to do, then you can take that particular technique and identify it every day of the week. We're not just going to read from a book. Of course, we're talking about techniques that you can't read in a book or learn in a seminar. These are only advanced techniques, all of which have been and are every day created by money launderers who are only limited by their imagination. Remember, money launderers are constantly looking for new ways to beat the compliance world. Whether that means they go to an industry that's not known for money laundering, or whether they go to some trade or business where people involved in it would never be associated with it. But P.S., they may not even realize what they're doing when they're facilitating it. Money launderers are very crafty. Remember, they usually have many years of experience as legitimate bankers. They know how the game is played, and they know how to pervert it for their own ends.
Again, Ken, it's fascinating. I've been, fortunate enough to be able to read your book, and obviously I've spoken to you a number of times, and I heard you at Decoding Financial Crime, and this is genuinely a call out and a plea to people that are working in this space. please come, please join. Yes, it's not free, and yes, there is a charge, but for good reason. You know. Getting into the mindset of people that you're trying to catch and combat is so critical. You cannot catch a criminal unless you understand how a criminal thinks. And honestly, there is no better person that I've ever come across than Ken, and I'm delighted that he's entrusted us at TITC to work with him and bring an audience who really can benefit for this. This is not about selling. This is not about upselling anything. In fact, Ken's been very generous and is going to give a free copy of his book out to anyone who comes on to this seminar. The links will be below. If there's any questions anyone has, you can reach out to me directly. I can filter any questions directly to Ken as well. But Ken, listen, just to sort of put some dates on this, we're looking at it's a three-part seminar on the 2nd, 4th, and 6th of December. The times are all on the website as well. We've made it very, very simple. This is not pre-recorded. This will be live. You will have an opportunity to ask Ken any questions throughout the seminar as well. I really do encourage anyone who's listening to this that's not only interested in this world, and it's absolutely fascinating, but whose careers here are here and who are protecting consumers, protecting businesses, protecting governments, protecting countries. Please come on and take part. This is. You've got an opportunity to hear it from someone that's actually been in the trenches, someone that's come through, been reformed, now working with law enforcement, and really is at the cutting edge of these strategies that money launderers are putting on. And Ken, I must say, during the Decoding Financial Crime event, we had someone lined up from the National Prosecutor Authority here in South Africa. The night before, we had a phone call saying, "I'm really sorry, I cannot make it. The MPA have banned me from traveling or from actually leaving my house because there's been a threat on my life of an active case." So this is real world. This is not the movies. This really is impactful. This does affect millions of people. This affects economies. This affects things like, as I mentioned right at the very beginning, human trafficking, drugs, cartels. This is very, very serious. So, please do come on. You'll note from my demeanour today that I'm not necessarily my jovial self, and that's really because of the seriousness of this topic. So, Ken, any closing thoughts from you? Obviously, we'll put all the links below, and we'll make sure that it's very easy for anyone to navigate. But is there anything that you want to sort of leave our audience with?
Yes, Darren. I want to direct this to the frontline compliance officers, the people in the banks, credit unions, and non-bank financial institutions who every day have to look at transactions, who every day have to onboard new clients and new customers. The reason I want to see you at the seminar is because you're going to see things which you'll never understand unless somebody explains them to you. You need to see them solely from the perspective of the practicing money launderer. And that's what we're going to show you. We're not just going to give you a technique. We're going to show you how it works, and we're going to prepare you for identifying it in real time.
Well, there you go, everyone. As I said, details are going to be below. Ken, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on to this podcast. We wanted to keep it short and sweet, and to the point. And I think you've done a very good job of doing that. So thank you. As I said, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me or any of my team at TITC. And we hope to see you during the seminar. Ken, thank you very, very much for your time. And until next time, goodbye, everyone.